presentation will be about Lech Walesa and the decisions that he made throughout his life, from when he was an electrician with great dreams to when he was president of his country. Lech Walesa was born in 1943 in Popowa, Poland. His father was a carpenter, and due to his family's struggles for money, Walesa only managed to get primary and vocational education. After graduating from vocational school in 1961, he began work as a car mechanic. He did this for 4 years before serving in the army for a few years. In 1969, he married Danuta Golish, and the couple now has 8 children. In 1970, he began work at London shipyards in Gdansk as an electrician. He lost that job in 1976 and had to do whatever jobs he could find for a few years. In 1980, he organized a massive strike at London shipyards. This eventually led to his founding an independent trade union, Solidarity. He was imprisoned for this in 1991 and was only released 2 years later in 1983. The same year, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his actions. In 1988, an economic collapse in Poland forced the government to give Walesa a major role in rebuilding the economy. After that, he obtained from the government that there would be free elections in Poland from then on. Thanks to this, he was able to become the president of Poland in 1990. But his policies weren't acceptable for the country, and when he ran for re-election in 1995, his unpopularity meant that he lost this election. The 2 decisions that Walesa made throughout his life that I will be focusing on will be deciding to lead a massive strike at London shipyards in 1980 and on running for president of Poland in 1990. In 1970, workers didn't benefit from the way that the communist government organized the economy. When the government raised food prices, this led to violent protests, with Walesa as one of the leaders. In 1976, when there were further disagreements between the workers and the government, Walesa had a more prominent role in the protests. For this reason, he was fired from his job, and 4 years later, for 4 years, he scraped by, doing any job he could find to feed his family. In 1978, a more liberal Soviet policy inspired further protests. That year, Walesa created the Baltic Free Trade Unions movement. The following year, he and many other protesters signed charters of workers' rights, demanding an 8-hour day, higher wages, an end to censorship, the right to strike, and the right to form independent trade unions, which was an important demand considering the Communist Party's desire to control all labor activity. In August 1980, workers at London shipyard seized control of the facility, in protest of a further increase in food prices. According to legend, Walesa climbed the fence surrounding the shipyard in spite of police surrounding the facility. When he was inside, Walesa created the Inter-Factory Strike Committee to unite workers, negotiate with management, and politicize the strike. The effects of Walesa's decision to lead the strike were simply huge and spanned over nearly a decade. First of all, 17 days after the strike has begun, the workers were getting their main demands, the right to organize freely and the right to strike. Then, later that year, December 1980, Walesa created his independent trade union, Solidarność, or Solidarity. In 1981, however, changing the Soviet Union's policy meant a military buildup on Poland's border. At the same time, Polish First Secretary Wojciech Jaruzelski began to imprison dissidents. Throughout the year, there were lots of strikes and demonstrations over the arrests. In August, at the height of Solidarity's united activism, Walesa demanded free elections. This proved too much for the government, and in December it imposed martial law, declared Solidarity dissolved, and arrested Walesa. He was released in 1983 due to international protests surrounding the arrest, and that same year he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Years passed, Solidarity's influence grew, and by 1988, economic collapse forced the government to grant Solidarity and its leader a major role in rebuilding the economy. This meant the government had to recognize Solidarity and agree to elections that provide the activist group with seats in the legislature. At the same time, events in the Soviet Union favorized Walesa's cause as Mikhail Gorbachev's reform programs meant that there would be reduced support for hardline regimes in Eastern Europe. In 1989, finally, Walesa led Solidarity to victory in the parliament elections, and eventually the first non-communist government in the Soviet bloc's realm was formed, the condition to elect Tadeusz Mazowiecki as the Polish PM. However, following the 1989 parliament elections, Walesa was disappointed that some of his former comrades were satisfied by governing alongside former communists. For this reason, he decided to run for president, which of course he made it possible for himself to do in the first place. His slogan for these elections was, "I don't want to, but I've got no choice." His popularity meant that he won the elections by a great majority of the votes, and so on December 9, 1990, he was sworn in as President of Poland. His struggle was finally coming to an end. Surprisingly enough, though, the effect of Walesa becoming the president was a very bad thing for Poland. After winning the elections, Walesa resigned as the leader of Solidarity. Upon gaining office, Walesa supported the privatization of Poland's economy in order for its country to develop a free market. Outdated factories, poor investments, and workers' reluctance to abandon the security of their current employment meant that it was difficult for Walesa to bring prosperity to Poland. Economic dislocations meant that prices went up and that thousands of people were unemployed. Critics accused Walesa of being dictatorial and claimed that his talent lay in opposing the government, not being at its head. And in some ways they were right. Walesa's policies turned out not to be suited to his country. His popularity went down fast, and he failed his attempt at re-election in 1995. In conclusion, though, Walesa is directly or indirectly responsible for almost everything that Poland is today. Even though he wasn't really suited for governing the country, he liberated his country from its Soviet oppressors and paved the way for later leaders to make Poland what it is today. Surely without him, Poland wouldn't be part of the EU. Surely without him, Poland would have organized the Euro in 2008. What began as a strike committee turned into the rebirth of a nation. All that thanks to one man, Lech Walesa.